My friends, it is absolutely wild that drones truly seem to be the new kings of the battlefield. At the beginning of June of 2025, Ukraine would go and destroy dozens of enemy bombers using a horde of drones smuggled deep into Russia in what is honestly a stunning attack that Russian war bloggers are even going and calling Moscow's Pearl Harbor. This was the most damaging Ukrainian attack on Russia in the 3 years since Moscow invaded, and no, when I say that, I am not kidding with the comparison that Russian military bloggers are actually making. As one of them, Roman Alikin, would write on Telegram, and I quote, "We hope that the response will be the same as the US response to the attack on their Pearl Harbor, or even tougher." End quote. Which, okay, pause, please pause right now. I'm sorry, I don't really get political on this channel. I try to stay as neutral as I can, but I have to call this one out as one of genuinely the dumbest statements that I have heard in quite a while. This guy is comparing the Ukrainian strike to the 1941 Japanese raid on the US base in Hawaii, something that was done as a preemptive strike by Japan before any military operations or war had started. This strike, in comparison, happened over 3 years into a conflict that, at this point, has killed hundreds of thousands of people, soldiers, and civilians alike. They are not the same or similar in any way, shape, or form. So moving on. Per Ukrainian intelligence, the coordinated strikes on June 1st would take a massive $7 billion toll on Russia's military and demolished more than a third of Moscow's strategic cruise missile carriers, including planes that were capable of carrying nuclear warheads. When describing this, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called the massive attack, which he said used 117 drones, his country's, quote, longest range operation. Oksana Markarova, Kyiv's ambassador to the United States, would go and call the attack a very successful defensive operation in Russia against Russian aircraft that on a daily basis bomb our hospitals and schools and kill our kids. End quote. Speaking at an AI event in Washington, Markarova would say that it was the best example of how innovation can and should work in defense. One of the things that is so crazy about this is that Ukraine was set to meet Russia for US-brokered peace talks the next day. This taking place at the same time that Russia has been trying to make advances on the battlefield, showcasing that neither side really was counting on any kind of breakthrough to happen with negotiations, that fighting was going to continue. The operation, codenamed Spiderweb, was typical of the style of warfare that Ukraine has made its brand, as it attempts to undercut Russia's larger, more powerful military by flooding the zone with cheap, deadly drones that are hostile and dangerous to both men, material, and anything else. And that right there is just it, my friends. That is the crucial detail. Cheap, but deadly. That is the true nature of war that many simply do not appreciate. War is a numbers game, but the type of numbers that are used vary depending upon the country, the tactics, the technology available. Drones, as it is, are just the latest step in the great global competition. And although they certainly were useful in older conflicts, that is nothing in comparison to what it is that we see from them today and what that means for the future. So in light of this, looking at everything that was happening, I figured that for today's context, we could take a step back and look at the history of drone warfare, how it evolved to become the new king of the battlefield rather than tanks or planes. Because I'm telling you this right now, countries around the world are watching the Russo-Ukrainian conflict with great interest, as it has been the testing ground for military ideas and hardware that are likely going to define the next century of warfare. What that result will be, we don't exactly yet know. But we can explain how it is that we got here in the first place, so with that, let's go ahead and dive in. But hey, I guess being stuck in a state where it's impossible to progress from is genuinely something that is very frustrating. And honestly, that's why you should not let yourself be stuck in your career either, by going to today's sponsor, Strawberry.me. Yes, for those of you who have not heard of it, Strawberry.me is a career coaching service designed to help professionals at every stage to stop waiting for opportunities and to actually go and create them. Whether it's prepping for a job transition, mastering salary negotiation, accelerating one's career growth, Strawberry.me can help. And look, I know when I'm talking about this, it's going to sound odd from the get-go, me, a YouTuber, talking about career coaching in the corporate world. But also, in the first place, career coaching is no joke. I would not be doing nearly anything that I currently do today, if not for someone like my wife, as an example, kicking my butt to actually do it in the first place. I have 2 YouTube channels, I do TikTok, I do Twitch, I have a podcast, I do all these things, and among all the stuff that I just listed, I would only have done TikTok if not for her forcing me to do other things. And that, honestly, I think parallels with a lot of people. Look, the reality is we need to get help sometimes to get to the next level. We're not talking about something that is therapy. This is not consulting. It's not mentoring. This is action-oriented coaching for results. And every coaching plan of Strawberry.me is tailored to your personal goals and is flexible with your specific schedule. It is a proven fact that instead of waiting for your raise, people make significantly more money by leveraging their position and jumping into a new job. So by all means, go and get matched with a career coach today by going to strawberry.me/history of everything and claim your $50 credit there. Click my link down in the description, and I wish you the best of luck here, my friends. First and foremost, then, we need to define what it is that we are talking about here. What exactly is a drone? And no, that's not a rhetorical question. A drone is an unmanned aircraft that can be remotely controlled or fly autonomously using pre-programmed flight plans or more complex dynamic automation systems. Drones can be equipped with various tools, whether this is cameras, sensors, or other types of hostile payloads that are meant to perform a wide range of different tasks. They can come in different shapes and sizes, from small quadcopters to large fixed-wing aircraft. And from then, they can be categorized based off their design. You have fixed wing, you have single rotor, multi-rotor, hybrid VTOL, which is the vertical takeoff and landing for anyone who is curious about that. All of these drones have their own kind of strengths and weaknesses and are suitable for different tasks. And we are seeing all of them in modern warfare at this point. I swear to God, there's so many Call of Duty references that can be shoved into here.
Heads up, enemy UAV spotted.
As it is, my friends, the concept of unmanned flight is not a new one. It emerged back in the late 19th century with the development of early radio-controlled aircraft, though that, in comparison to what we have today, is extremely different. These were often simple models that were used for experimentation or entertainment, with the most common being hydrogen-filled model airships that were flown as a music hall act around theater auditoriums using a basic form of spark-emitted radio signal. Which, yeah, cute and cool to be sure, but not exactly very deadly. And when I talk about this, I know there's already going to be some comments that are going to be mentioning this. I am not talking about or counting the 1849 example of Austrian forces using incendiary balloons to bombard Venice. Because yes, there were war balloons that I guess were UAVs or something, but you couldn't really control them, so we're not really going to count that. Anyway, it was not long, though, before real drones were being used for war. The first recorded use of unmanned aircraft for military purposes was during World War I, when the British would go and develop the aerial target. This intended to be an aerial tornado that was to be used against Zeppelin bombers and U-boats, and it was named the aerial target in order to trick the Germans into thinking that, oh, this is just an actual target that was meant for testing anti-aircraft weapons. You know, kind of like the same thing that was done with the tank. As it was, though, no, it was a weapon. The flying torpedo, as it was then, would take off for the first time under radio control in March of 1917, a feat that would see its creator called the father of radio guidance systems, and more recently, the father of the drone, since this was the first one. The initial demonstration was far from perfect, though, we will say. It did end with a massive crash, but, you know, hey, early technology. That's kind of what happens. It was something, at least. Anyway, moving on from that, during the interwar period between World War I and World War II, there was a lull in military drone development. Because go figure, people aren't really fighting during that time. But advancements in radio control technology would help to pave the way for future developments that we would then start to see in World War II and the later 40s. From this time then, my friends, the British continued to develop target drones, including something called the Queen Bee, a radio-controlled version of the de Havilland Tiger Moth biplane. The Germans would also experiment with their own unmanned aircraft, though I should say calling the V-1 and subsequent V-2 rockets unmanned aircraft is probably less accurate a term since they were pretty much just flying bombs. Yeah, these were the early cruise missiles, as they would later become. That all being said, though, there was something that we could essentially call a drone, but it's not necessarily what you think. You see, the United States Army Air Force dominated the skies over Germany in 1944 with conventional weapons. However, late war developments and research would allow the Germans to use some truly impressive technology, and this is something that would inspire an American response. The Americans, if met with futuristic technology, would also combat this with their own. They would use remotely piloted bombers loaded with explosives to try and target hardened German targets. Yes, we're talking unmanned kamikaze planes, essentially. The result of this was a pair of top-secret programs. You had the AAF's Aphrodite and the Navy's Anvil. B-17, B-24, and PBY-41 bombers were all stripped of standard equipment, and instead of having machine guns or other things on them, were instead filled with explosives so that they could be guided by a mother plane, which would then dive onto a heavily defended target. Honestly, looking at it, considering that you're not putting a highly trained bomber crew at risk, it does seem like a pretty good idea at the time, but it mostly failed in practice. In fact, the effort is today remembered largely for killing Navy Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., the son of the former ambassador to Great Britain and the brother of future President of the US, John F. Kennedy. So yeah, not exactly, when we look at this, a great start to modern-ish war drones, but the concept was there, it was proven to work. If only they could get it to work more often than it failed, for less resources. Blowing up planes is very expensive after all. Moving on from that then, the Cold War would see significant investments in drone technology by both the United States as well as the Soviet Union, the superpowers of the day and eternal rivals, or at least rivals for the next half century before it is that everything within the Soviet Union collapsed. The US would go and develop the Ryan Firebee series, which were used for reconnaissance and target practice. The Lockheed D-21 drone, a high-speed, high-altitude reconnaissance drone, was also developed during this period, and the Soviet Union would respond with its own drone programs, which would, like the US, focus primarily on surveillance as well as target practice, because a lot of the technology for what we would term offensive drones wasn't there yet. In fact, when I'm going describing these different things, one of the ones that is so interesting and prominent back during the Cold War was a drone called the Girardin QH-50, which was the first drone helicopter ever put into operation and was the first armed, unpiloted aerial vehicle. A far cry of what we have here today, but it was something. Or you would think that, but the story behind why this whole thing happened is wild. The introduction of Soviet nuclear-powered submarines in the early 1960s meant that there was a demand within the US military to have a remotely piloted helicopter that could operate from smaller, older destroyers and carry a Mark 57 nuclear depth bomb. Which, oh dear God, just imagine the environmental damage that would come from a fleet of those. Or it could also just have like 2 torpedoes. Either way though, along with hunting submarines, some QH-50 drones were deployed during the Vietnam War, though they were primarily used for spotting naval gunfire. A more common sight over Vietnam though, that was the AQM-34 Ryan Firebee, which originally was designated the Q-2. Now the Firebee is fascinating because it began its career as a jet-powered target drone for both surface-to-air and air-to-air missiles. And in the 1960s, the US Air Force would modify the Firebee for its stealth surveillance missions, adding things like radar and absorbing paint to reduce its signature. Over the course of 1964 to 1975, some 1,000 AQM-34s, which were launched and controlled from Lockheed DC-130s, would fly more than 34,000 operational surveillance missions over Southeast Asia, with, as it was, 83% of them returning home to do further missions, which again, considering the technology of the day and how all of this was experimental, very impressive. We are getting somewhere here at this point. But the real changes were yet to come, as drones were still by this point, from everything it is that I've described, more of niche toys for the military that were expensive to use and definitely not as good as a skilled pilot for actual fighting. You were way better off having anti-air systems as well as actual skilled pilots than you were to have a drone try and go chase down a pilot flying a plane. One of the key reasons for this was that even though the United States would achieve massive breakthroughs in manufacturing and supplying drones for the military, being able to produce them in larger numbers than just about every other entity, UAVs were often considered unreliable and, more importantly, expensive. We are not talking about the cheap drones of today. This view would change, however, in 1982, when Israeli forces using unmanned aircraft would gain victory over the Syrian Air Force with pretty much no losses whatsoever. You see, during the 1982 Lebanon War, the Israelis were confronted by Syrian surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, which were located in heavy numbers in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley. All 28 SAM sites in the Bekaa ended up getting destroyed, however, and part of the reason for this was through the use of Samson decoys to get them to reveal their presence, and partly through reconnaissance information that was obtained by Mastiff and Scout UAVs. Because of the massive success that the Israelis had with UAVs on the battlefield, this then came to the attention of the US military, especially after the American intervention in Lebanon in 1983, which would then lead to the US Navy's request for a battlefield UAV in 1984. From this, a joint project by the US and Israel in 1986 would lead to the development of the RQ-2 Pioneer, a medium-sized reconnaissance aircraft, which is great, but again, we're describing reconnaissance aircraft. The real shift is what we see next. Over the course of the 1990s, significant advancements in drone technology would take place, especially with the development of the RQ-1 Predator by General Atomics Aeronautical Systems, which was capable of flying over dangerous areas for extended periods without actually risking a pilot. Originally designed for reconnaissance, the Predator was equipped with surveillance capabilities, and the introduction of satellite communication links allowed for remote piloting and real-time data transmission over long distances, making it invaluable for spying. But here then is where we see the big changes start to happen. While yes, the potential for UAVs has been recognized for decades as they are great spy tools, the 21st century would mark the significant transformation of drones from just spy tools to tools of war and destruction. In the year 2002, the RQ-1 Predator was outfitted with AGM-114 Hellfire missiles, transforming it into the MQ-1 Predator, capable of conducting precision strikes. Its use would play a crucial role in targeted strikes in conflict zones like Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, and over the course of the entire global war on terror. This is already impressive enough. But what we would then see afterwards is arguably one of the most recognized and popular military drones that we would see for years, the MQ-9 Reaper, something that is known for long endurance, high altitude operations, and the ability to carry a variety of different weapons. The Reaper is essentially a larger, more heavily armed version of the MQ-1 Predator, and is often referred to as a hunter-killer drone, with its primary use then being for attacking time-sensitive targets, but also being capable of used for intelligence gathering, surveillance, reconnaissance, and more. But if we want to go even bigger, while the Predator's role is to focus on targets and provide situational awareness for pilots, you then have the RQ Global Hawk, which provides much broader systemic surveillance using high-resolution synthetic aperture radar and long-range electro-optical infrared sensors. The Hawk was truly a beast, and was capable of hovering at altitudes of 60,000 feet over target areas for long periods of time. We're talking greater than 30 hours just hanging out in a general direction, in all kinds of weather, capable of surveying as much as 100,000 square kilometers a day. But the thing is, my friends, when I am talking about all of this, everything that I have been describing here so far are arguably the big drones. Those aren't the drones that we are really seeing nearly as much of here in Ukraine now. In contrast, what we would start to see afterwards is the RQ-11 Raven, something manufactured by Aerovirament Inc., which is a small, portable, hand-launched drone designed for rapid deployment and high mobility, mostly for military operations like low-altitude reconnaissance, surveillance, and autonomous operation. In what I would essentially describe as a giant paper airplane capable of being thrown by a soldier without, actually being made out of paper, this is a valuable reconnaissance tool, able to gain up-to-date, real-time views of the horizon and of enemy positions while not endangering the soldier's life. If anything, imagine the UAVs from Call of Duty Modern Warfare. And so speaking of that, this is then the start of modern warfare. As a sign of the fact that times were changing, in the year 2008, the New York Air National Guard 174th Attack Wing would become the first fighter unit to transition entirely to unmanned combat. No more flying around in planes, blowing up targets personally. No, instead they were going to trade their F-16 cockpits for air-conditioned trailers in the desert where they would be able to remotely pilot MQ-9 Reapers while eating some Tostitos. Things basically became COD. For anyone who grew up in the late 2000s going into the early 2010s, stories of drone strikes in the Middle East became the norm. And these were used heavily by former President Barack Obama in the War on Terror. But also, interestingly enough, the 2010s would also witness an explosion in not military flight, but commercial and recreational drone use. Drones gradually became more and more affordable and accessible, leading to their use in a variety of different applications, whether that was video, photography, agricultural use, infrastructure inspection, even delivery services, which we now see some stuff here today. Regulations, as you can expect, did have to be put in place. These were meant to ensure the safe operation of drones, which would include registration requirements and no-fly zones, and other rules and requirements for different cities. It was something that did give some restrictions, but as it was, a whole new world had opened up for enthusiasts, as well as, when I say that, also some bad actors. And yes, my friends, if you are looking at me right now, I do realize at this point that much of my video here has been very American focused, and I do apologize for that. There is a very important reason. Besides what we have seen with Israel in the Middle East, pretty much no other power besides America until recent times had even close to the same level of practical experience when it came to drones and warfare. And this is an important point. I know that there are a lot of commenters who take offense when I say these kinds of things. I am not knocking the UK, France, Germany, Russia, China, or any other power. That is simple reality. Before the Russo-Ukrainian War, there has not been an extended military conflict that great powers could learn from or gain experience in for literally decades. China is arguably one of the biggest developers of drones in the entire world, with their latest unveiling, if you've seen the viral videos, being a drone mothership that, get this, flies around and spawns more drones, like some kind of alien vessel from a movie. That and other Chinese propaganda vessels likely do deserve their own video outright here in the future, because dear God, it looks cool, but it's not very practical at all. Like, that thing would suck. But that is honestly the biggest point that I need to reiterate. A country can come out with as many high-tech looking gadgets and ideas and premises as it wants, but until they're actually tested on the battlefield, you won't really know their worth. From the outset of the conflict, both Ukrainian and Russian forces recognized the potential of drones for tactical advantages. Soldiers on both sides began to adapt off-the-shelf drone models, transforming them into effective tools for surveillance as well as attacks. These drones, often modified with explosives, became a staple on the battlefield, contributing significantly to increased lethality. I mean, if you watching, how many of you have seen videos of a drone flying over the battlefield with a grenade tied to string on it? Because that happened. The use of drone swarms became a dominant tactic, with both sides deploying multiple small drones in order to try and overwhelm enemy positions. This strategy made defense more effective than trying to attack and becoming exposed, which in turn made the front lines extremely lethal zones that devolved into trench warfare in the early stages of the conflict. The skies above the front lines were oftentimes filled with small quadricopters, providing real-time intelligence and precision strike capabilities, whether that was merely spotting positions for artillery or dropping an explosive onto someone's head unwittingly. One of the key things that we would see develop in this time is Ukraine's drone strategy of first-person view drones, FPV, which are small, fast, and equipped with cameras that allow operators to see from the drone's perspective. These drones are oftentimes used for suicide missions. They are not meant to actually last, they are disposable, they are meant to crash into targets and explode on impact. Which, the simplicity and effectiveness of these drones makes them a favorite tool for both surveillance as well as to direct attacks and carry out attacks. They are the perfect cheap answer to just about any kind of problem. And on that note, I want to present some math for you so you understand what I'm talking about. Yes, if you remember everything that I covered with the American drones here before, there are very expensive drones that are used in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict that range from a couple $100,000 to a few $1 million. But the majority of drones cost anywhere between $300 and $1,000. especially among the cheap suicide ones. Missiles, tanks, planes, all of these things cost millions of dollars to produce, use, maintain, and more. And right now, the Russians are estimated to have lost thousands of tanks and vehicles. T-64 tanks, which cost $1 million, T-72, $1.2 million, T-80 tanks, $3 million, T-90 tanks, $4.5 million, and that's just the tanks. There are many more tracked and untracked vehicles that have also been destroyed. And the majority of these losses, in turn, come from much cheaper drones. Drones have fundamentally altered the character of warfare in Ukraine. They've become the primary cause of casualties, surpassing traditional artillery. This shift has forced both sides to try and adapt their tactics, with greater emphasis being placed on drone countermeasures and the development of more resilient drone technologies. And so that, my friends, is why Ukraine struck deep into the heart of Russia then. As I said from the beginning, the operation that we're talking about here, Spiderweb, this is something that was prepared in secret over the course of 18 months. Ukraine's agents would move short-range drones and explosives inside of Russia before they were launched remotely for a coordinated strike this past Sunday on June 1st, something that was intended to strike at Moscow's air superiority, which it has maintained since the start of the war, as it has had a much larger economy and industrial base, along with a much larger, older fleet of vehicles. Per Vasyl Malyuk, the head of security services of Ukraine, SBU, he would say that drones were smuggled into Russia and were then placed inside of containers, which were later loaded onto trucks. A key component of this operation was its use of covert logistics that were meant to be conducted through Russian territory, which actually involved using Russian civilians without them knowing as participants. As part of the operation's deception strategy, the SSU would reportedly recruit Russian truck drivers, Russian, not Ukrainian, to go and deliver mobile drone launchers camouflaged as standard cargo trucks to different locations around the country. These drivers were instructed to arrive at specific times and park at pre-designated locations in the vicinity of strategic air bases, including fuel stations and alongside roadside areas. And from then, as all the trucks moved into place, the roof panels of the containers were lifted off by a remotely activated mechanism, allowing the drones to fly out and begin their attack. These drones had first-person view, FPV technology, that allowed them to be operated remotely from, presumably, Ukrainian territory. Why is it that they did this from Russia, you may wonder? Well, attempting to launch drones from Ukraine would have been significantly harder, as they would have had to cover a huge distance and avoid Russia's air defenses. At any given time, assuming that 117 were launched, they would have potentially lost over 90% of them. But through the tactic that they chose, it was a massive success. And Ukraine's SBU would say that the strike damaged 41 planes that were used against Ukraine, though the full extent of the damage at this point remains unclear, and it of course is hard to trust whatever it is that actually comes out of Russia. Among those claimed to have been hit were A-50 surveillance planes, supersonic Tu-160 and Tu-22 bombers, as well as massive Tu-95s, which were planes developed to carry nuclear bombs and now are used to launch cruise missiles. Altogether, the SBU said that the planes that had been hit and damaged were worth a combined $7 billion. And that is $7 billion over the course of just 4 different air bases. You have Belya Air Base in Irkutsk, which is more than 2,500 miles from Ukraine, and other targets included the Olenya Air Base in Murmansk, Yagalibo Air Base in Ryazan, and Ivanovo-Severny Air Base in Ivanovo. Along with all of this damage, one of the wildest aspects about this entire story, though, is that it appears that perhaps all personnel involved in the operation were successfully moved from Russian territory into Ukraine before the drones were launched, meaning that, per the Ukrainians, every single one of their operatives actually got out. The Russians, of course, will have claimed that they have captured some, but we really won't know the truth of that matter for potentially years, if ever. Even if we look at the numbers that have been presented and assume that it is maybe half or a third of what Ukraine has said has happened, this is not only a success, it is a massive success. Something that, even if it is not a decisive blow to end the war, has done so much damage that it is going to be studied for centuries. As I've already explained countless times at this point in the past in previous videos, and now here about cost effectiveness in warfare, this point has been proven once again. First-person view drones, built with inexpensive components and controlled via open-source autopilot systems, can destroy strategic aircraft worth billions of dollars. These drones, costing anywhere between $300 to $1,000, successfully struck aircraft like the Tu-95Ms and the Tu-22M3 bombers, worth billions, that Russia uses to launch their Kh-101 and Kh-22 missiles, respectively. This is something that serves as proof of the growing trend that we are seeing in modern warfare. Mass-produced, simple systems with limited range or payloads can inflict disproportionate strategic damage when combined with creative thought, intelligent targeting, and a will to do something different. Altogether now, my friends, it points to a very obvious statement. Drones are the new kings of the battlefield. The future may be uncertain, but you can bet for the foreseeable time they are going to play a dominant role. And it will not matter to nearly the same degree how powerful you are as a nation, how strong your economy is, even, technically speaking, how advanced you are technologically to a degree. Everything points to a future where technological agility, the ability to rapidly utilize technology for new and innovative strategies, not just your simple industrial ability or economic output, that is going to determine what side has the advantage. It does not matter if someone is able to develop a technology, if someone is able to use it in a more innovative way to wreak havoc. The militaries that adapt early by investing in drone countermeasures and adapting their battle doctrine, they are going to be the ones that come out on top, even as battlefields are going to constantly shift in the future. But with that all being said, my friends, that is the end of today's video. I appreciate you all here for watching. The moment I saw that whole thing happened here with Ukraine, I had to dive in because I haven't really done a deep dive into different types of drones and whatnot here before. If there's other types of technology, if there are other things that you want to see that play a disproportionate role when it comes to geopolitics and effects, then by all means, I would definitely dive in. This is the first video I've done here in a while since we did the Toyota Hilux and technicals video. So make sure to give a like, subscribe, check out my merch if you really want to support my channel. It is something that definitely helps me here. And I will see you later here, my friends. Goodbye.